Hello, my name is Abby Tessendorf, and I am the Services Director at the Center for Survivors. And I'm here today to talk to you about dating violence, sexual assault, and basically how to help your mentees. I think that as adults, a lot of times we're not quite sure what that looks like in teens. Dating violence, while power and control is still the same as a domestic violence situation, teen dating violence, I think, can be a little bit tricky for adults to recognize. Actually, we just added a stat to our slideshow that we use for presentations. And that slide, I was just thinking of that, Taylor. That was good thinking. The stat showed that even though 82% of parents think that they could correctly identify the signs of dating violence, when it came down to it, 58% could not. 58% of parents could not accurately define the signs of dating violence. So if parents can't, then mentors probably don't have any more, because most mentors are probably parents. And if we're not sure what it is, how do we help our mentees with it? So I'm here to talk about what does dating violence look like, and also sexual assault. We know that those are issues that kids are dealing with, and I think they're also issues that as adults sometimes we're nervous to talk about, nervous to go over, nervous to confront. And I'm telling you, your kids are talking about it. The last few years, there's been more and more reports of sexual assault. It's been more public. I think that that's an area where the kids are probably more comfortable talking than adults. So we're going to start by just going right into what dating violence is. This can be a tough subject. When we talk about sexual assault and dating violence, unfortunately, a lot of people have experience with this. If they haven't been victimized themselves, they almost always know someone or love someone that have gone through this. So it's really important, if it's an uncomfortable topic or if it's too close to home, you should always step out, give yourself a break, and make sure that you talk to somebody that can help you get through that. So the facts. 1 in 3 adolescents in the U.S. is a victim of physical, sexual, emotional, or verbal abuse from a dating partner, a figure that far exceeds rates of other types of youth violence. We talk about gang violence. Those things are really important, but this statistic is even higher than that, and it's a topic that we are really kind of unfamiliar with. 1 in 10 high school students has been purposefully hit, slapped, or physically hurt by a boyfriend or a girlfriend. A lot of people think dating violence victims can only be girls. That's not the case at all. That statistic, it doesn't matter if it's a young man or a young lady. It can be either. And nearly 1.5 million high school students nationwide experience physical abuse from a dating partner in a single year. That is a huge number. It's a huge number. So let's go over the types of abuse. I think that there's oftentimes confusion about what does violence look like. I think most people think of it as physical, and that's just one small part. Obviously, physical types of dating violence: shoving, slapping, hitting, punching, biting. One very common tactic is abandoning someone in a dangerous place. We are located right now in the Midwest, right? We have a lot of wide open spaces. That is a common tactic that an abuser would take a victim out in the middle of nowhere and then say, oh, fine, you don't want to do what I do? You want to make me mad? You walk home. Well, you know what? Yesterday it was 2 below zero, probably not safe for that victim to get out. Driving too fast or recklessly, we do see that. Frightening their partner in a car, not letting them get out. Painful tickling. There is some power and control to tickling. There's one thing to flirt and to be loving with that. Like when you think about when you tickle your kids, it's to get them giggly, and you know the difference between when it's too much. And when it's too much, it's a tactic that's used against the partner because it seems sweet and it seems loving, but it's actually controlling. So a little bit different than domestic violence. Emotional and verbal abuse I kind of usually put together in one category. Telling the victim how to think, act, feel, dress, isolating from friends and family, withholding affection, ignoring, gaslighting. Gaslighting is when you are so manipulative, you can talk your partner into remembering things in a different way than they actually occurred, like making them think they're crazy. You said that to me. Remember when you did that? Wait a minute, I didn't say that. Yes, you did. You said that to me. And the victim is so overwhelmed by it that they believe that they've done those things, or they believe that their partner didn't do something that their partner did do. Monitoring movements or communications. Let's talk about that for a minute. Monitoring movements or communications. Is that easy now or what? As a parent, I kind of love it because I can watch my kids on Life 360. I can Snapchat. My husband is clueless, but I'm on Snapchat because my kids are on Snapchat, right? And Snapchat, oh my gosh, you guys, it's so dangerous because there's no, we can't check up on our kids, but they also think that the stuff they send on there goes away, and police can absolutely get those things. It's not the easiest thing to do, but they can pull things off Snapchat that have gone away. I like to joke that kids think there's a virtual shredder in the sky. That's just not the case. But the thing about Snapchat that a lot of parents don't know, that a lot of mentors might not know, is that there's something on there called Snap Maps. And Snap Maps is not all that accurate. It kind of depends on Wi-Fi. So you can swipe, I think it comes from, Taylor, you would know better. You swipe from the top, right? You swipe from the, oh, Anna's over there. I know. You swipe from the top, and unless you've made yourself private on there, you can see your little emoji, it looks like me, right? It looks like Taylor. Taylor's is cuter. And you can see where people are. And now I have mine ghosted because I don't want people to know where I'm at. But I can tell you, I've made my kids ghost themselves many times. But guess what? I go on there all the time, and there's my kids because they don't see the harm in that. But you think about it in an abusive relationship, right? I can tell where she's at. I can tell where he's at. I know where they are. And they're oftentimes inaccurate. If the Wi-Fi skips around or it skips out, it might not show somebody where they really are, or it might have them still at a place that they've left. And that is a really dangerous thing. It's a really great tool for stalking, which is part of abuse. So technology has been wonderful, but it's also really dangerous. Verbal abuse, put downs, name calling, accusations, humiliations, threats. I want to talk about that for a minute because I think that most people think physical violence is the worst part of dating violence. But the truth is, most victims, most survivors will tell you that the emotional and verbal abuse is far more damaging. I want to share with you just a really quick story about a case that I had when I lived in another state. I worked with adults. This is an adult case, but I worked with a woman who was fleeing domestic violence, and she was waiting for her tax return. It was back in the days where you didn't have that digitally sent to you, right? You had to wait for it in the mail. And when she got that money, she was going to go back home, which was a different state. Her family didn't have the means to come get her. She had done everything right? She had made a safety plan. I had copies of her things because as soon as she got that check, she was going to come to me, get her stuff, and she was out of there. We were going to send her on a bus back home. But she had earned that money, so she wanted that tax return. That was a prideful thing for her. She had gone one day to check the mailbox. Well, he had known, and we didn't know the whole time. And he met her. She had come back in where they had like a porch, and she had come back in the porch so excited. She had this check in her hand, and he beat her with a tire iron. And he beat her really quite horribly. I happened to be on call that night, and I got called to one of the hospitals, and I walk in, and the nurse says, there's a woman here. She's been the victim of domestic violence. It's pretty graphic. Just wanted to let you know. And I said, it's okay. I've done this before. I can handle it. I walk in, and I see a woman laying in this bed, and she's got a sheet over her. And I can see these welts. Her face is just, it's huge. It's swollen. Her eyes are swollen shut. She's probably been hit 50 times with a tire iron. It was horrible. And I say to her, hello, ma'am. I'm Abby. I'm here to help you. You're safe now. We're going to get you better. We're going to get you safe. And she looks at me, and tears go running down her eyes, and I'm going to use a made-up name. But she said, Abby, it's Karen. It's Karen. And it was this victim that I had worked with for months to be safe. And she was unrecognizable to me. And it was just heartbreaking to me that she had followed all the rules, and she still ended up harmed. But my point in telling you that, when I'm talking about emotional abuse, is as she got better, we kept in touch a little bit. We got her to her family, but I spoke to her about 6 months after she had gotten safe, and I said to her, that's one of the worst physical things I've ever seen. And she said, Abby, that's nothing. That's nothing. I would take 20 of those beatings over the daily. You're stupid, you're fat, you're worthless, you're dumb. She said, that is something that never goes away. Those are scars that are so deep, I don't know if I'll ever recuperate from that. So when we're talking about, that's an adult. So you think about a young person who's still developing who they are. They already don't like who they are. They're trying to figure out how to be adults, and then you have somebody saying those things. Those things are really, really damaging. So don't ever underestimate if your mentee says to you, he says that I'm fat all the time. He tells me that I'm ugly. Or if he says, oh, she's always jealous and she makes me feel bad about myself all the time. Those things are red flags. And the last one is sexual. Pressuring or coercing a person to have sex, accusing someone of being a prude or unfaithful, not allowing the use of condoms to prevent pregnancy. That is actually really common, very common. Forcing someone to perform sexual acts that they don't want to do. Making somebody feel manipulated, or like if they don't do something sexually that they're going to lose their boyfriend or girlfriend. Like, I'm going to break up with you. And I think that we see it probably more often with girls, but that's not always the case. We've talked to a lot of boys that have said, I wanted to wait, and she called me gay or said I was stupid if I didn't want to do that, and made fun of him because he didn't want to go farther. And that is definitely a type of sexual abuse. Who is a victim? So many stereotypes, myths about who is a victim. A victim is anybody. Dating violence doesn't discriminate against any age, sex, race, socioeconomic status, religion, education, employment, culture, dating or marital status, sexual orientation, or any other factor. We see it in every single school. It doesn't matter if it's a private school or a public school, in small towns, in cities. It is everywhere. It's across the board. Who is an abuser? An abuser can be anyone. Being abusive knows no boundaries, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, employment. The person is establishing and maintaining power and control over their intimate partner. Certainly we can identify personality traits, but if we're talking about a certain race or a certain culture, there's no rhyme or reason to it. So abuser typology and common traits. So these are the personality traits where we see that should be red flags. Now that doesn't mean that if you have somebody, I know lots of people in my life that have an entitled sense of self. That doesn't necessarily make them an abusive person. It's kind of when you see several of these things in a personality where you kind of start thinking, okay, we call these red flags. So one red flag might just be, hey, I'm going to be aware of that. But when you see several, that's where a real concern should come to light. Shows their good side to their significant other early in the relationship, kind of a Prince Charming. We find that they often come on strong. They want to get serious very quickly. They seem so perfect. But they do abuse in each relationship. That's another common misconception, that they're just bad together. They're a bad mix. If you're an abusive person, you're going to abuse every person that you ever are with. You're not going to pick and choose one partner over the other. You'll be abusive, and it might be different types of abuse. Maybe you're only physically abusive in one relationship, but you were emotionally abusive in the other. We do see that as abusers get older, they get more probably brave, and they become more, I think it becomes more serious and maybe more significant. They definitely have an entitled sense of self. Very rarely do abusers think that they're abusive. They think they're entitled to that behavior. They very often believe that he or she is the victim. Like, what are you talking about? I didn't do that. You have no idea how they are. They do that to me. They also continue to show their good side to others during abusive cycles. Dating violence has cycles to it, and they're very good at being charismatic and being very good in front of others and being a totally different person when they're behind closed doors. They always blame their significant other for the abuse, saying it's their fault. They never take responsibility for their own behavior. I mean, all of us have been in a disagreement with someone where we did something we wish we hadn't, where we have to say, okay, I shouldn't have said that. That wasn't okay. Abusers very rarely say that. I don't even know if they ever do. And they claim that he or she can't control their anger. We hear this across the board. We go into high schools all the time and we hear, it's an anger control problem. Now, there are people that I think legitimately have anger control problems, but anger control problem is a completely different problem than an abuser. An abuser picks when and where they abuse, and that is perfectly shown when you think about it as they might be in practice and a coach might yell at them and be like, in their face and they're raging about that, but they don't hit the coach, do they? They don't yell at the coach. They don't call the coach names. I'd like to see that. You guys know our football coaches here, if they go up to one of the coaches and call them a name. that wouldn't go over well, right? They can control that. They wait till they're with their partner, and then they just go off. That is not an anger control problem. They control when and where they get angry. Common red flags. They want the relationship to move quickly. They are very fast moving. They are not respectful of boundaries. They don't honor their partner's boundaries, meaning maybe the partner says, I'm in a sports season and I really only see you once a week because I've got school, I've got my practice, and the partner says, what do you mean? What, don't you love me? Why wouldn't you want to be with me? Who's over at practice that you want to see, huh? Who's over there? Why do you want to do that? Why wouldn't you want to be with me? Don't you love me? They're not respectful of their boundaries. If their partner says something like, I'm not really into public displays of affection. I'm kind of getting embarrassed about that. The partner would say, well, why? You embarrassed of me? Am I not good enough for you? Why do you want me to have my arm around you? Instead of being like, oh, maybe they don't want anyone to look at them. They're excessively jealous, accuse their partners of cheating. And this is one that we see it in every bad relationship we have ever worked with. Taylor is our adolescent advocate at the center, and so she actually goes and works with victims. And I would say this is something where victims really believe that they can, if they don't speak, okay, if I'm a girl and I'm a victim, if I don't speak to anyone in the hallway, if I wear sweatpants and a sweatshirt, if I don't look cute today, no one will talk to me and he won't be mad. Like, they feel like they can control that, and they can't, because it doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't matter what they do. If they go in and they look straight down, he could say, well, why were you looking at your feet? Who are you looking for? It doesn't matter what they do. Batters tend to be very, very jealous. They say one thing and they do another. They say, I love you, but then in the next breath they say, but you're stupid and you're ugly. And they say, please don't leave me. I want to be with you. I won't live if you leave me. And then in the next breath they say, no one would ever want you. You're a horrible person. Who would ever want you? And that can oftentimes come back to back in the conversation. Our presentation that we do in high school shows that, where just the change back and forth about saying something like, well, I really love you. And then like, oh, you're such a, and it all comes in the same conversation, which is that I'm going to skip down to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It really puts the victim on edge because they don't know what to expect. They don't know if I tell him that I'm upset about something, is he going to freak out? If I tell her that I'm upset at something, is she going to freak out? And they just seem too good to be true. That they're not genuine. It's very quick. It's very overpowering in the beginning, and it just doesn't seem like it can be that true. And then the other common red flag is that they just have an entitlement belief, like somehow they deserve respect. That's a common word with batterers. You need to respect me, but then they don't give that respect. They expect, because they're breathing, that someone should let them do what they want or let them have their way. It's very much an entitlement attitude. Okay, the cycle of abuse. The cycle of abuse is something that we see in pretty much every relationship, and the different phases can be different lengths. And it can be, not everybody's relationship that is abusive is like this all the time. Like, they might be in certain phases at different times. So we're going to start with honeymoon phase, which is often how relationships start, right? Abuser may show jealousy, which makes the victim feel special and important. This is something we see particularly common in adolescent relationships. That there's a stat that we share with kids. It says 35% of young people equate the word love with jealousy, possessiveness, and violence. For some reason, we have taught young women that if he's jealous, it's because he cares. Now, as humans, we all feel jealousy. Like, Trisha's got a really cute sweater on. I'm kind of jealous of that sweater. There's a difference between saying, oh, I'd really kind of like that thing, versus saying, I am mad at you because of that, right? You're mine. That's mine. I want that. And jealousy is never healthy. We all feel it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's abusive, but in this situation, it doesn't matter what they do. They're jealous all the time. And jealousy, we just try to talk to kids all the time about how that's not a good thing. They feel loved. They feel dependency on each other. No abuse is taking place here, and as they start, nothing's happened yet, right? The victim hopes that everything's going to be okay and everything is sweet. All right, so then tension building starts. Minor incidents occur, such as criticizing, yelling, and blaming. The victim often feels like they're walking on eggshells because they believe it's their fault that the abuser is upset. The victim spends time trying to figure out how they can prevent any violence from happening and keeping the abuser calm. Like when I talked about wearing certain clothes to try not to make him mad or to avoid eye contact. I worked with a kid once that had a class that was a lot of group projects. She would purposely put herself in groups with all girls so that maybe he wouldn't be jealous about that. She would freak out if the teacher would assign them and there might be a male in her group. That made her very nervous. So at this point, the victims still feel like they can control. If I just don't get him mad, if I just do all the right things, right? That's tension building. Explosive phase. This is tension will be released in a variety of ways depending on the history of the violence. Typically, it gets worse over time. So the first time that explosiveness happens, it could just be yelling and screaming. In dating relationships, and Taylor, I'll let you chime in if you want to add, but I think we see a lot of hitting walls, hitting things, breaking things. Breaking things,
destroying other people's property,
destroying their property, not letting someone out of a car. We see that a lot. Like you can't get out of the car. So it starts that way, and then as each episode occurs, this phase happens, those things will get worse. Maybe that's not enough anymore. Now maybe I'm going to punch something next to your face, or maybe I'm going to take an object and hit you with it, and before it actually becomes fist to face or whatever, which that does occur too. It gets worse over time. The abuser is out of control, terrorizes victims for hours, can break things, hitting, spitting, pushing, choking, burning, tying up, raping, or kicking the victim. The victim will survive this stage with bruises and broken bones and may end up in the hospital. Sometimes police will be called during this stage. I will tell you a trend we were really seeing a lot of was strangling. That there was less hitting. I think that is very common in adolescence. The other thing I think is very common is grabbing of the arms. As a mentor, that's something that I think you should be aware of when you work with your students. If it's, July and we're in the middle of Nebraska and your mentee is constantly wearing sweatshirts or hoodies, there is a reason for that. It might be hickeys, which hickeys are gross, but kids get them. It could be hickeys, but it might be because they have marks on their neck. It might be because they have marks on their arms, especially if they've shared with you that they're afraid of their partner or that you have red flags about that. I would really be asking some questions about that. A lot of times grabbing the arms right here and they get bruises on their arms. But strangling is actually freakishly common and it's really frightening. So sometimes police will get called, but the other thing I want to tell you about adolescents is adolescents don't tell adults, okay? They don't tell cops. They don't tell teachers, they don't tell parents. And as much as I want to tell you that the closer you are to your child, that they're going to tell you, I personally, this is my opinion of my 27 years doing this work, I think the closer you are to your child, the less likely your child is to tell you. Because the worst thing in the world would be is if they ever disappointed you. So, who knows here? Their friends, okay? The friends know. That's why we're working with adolescents, so that adolescents will get to the adults, okay? Reconciliation. Abuser apologizes and begs the victim to believe that the violence won't happen again. But on the other hand, they also blame the victim. Well, I'm so sorry that happened, but if you wouldn't be such a bitch, that wouldn't occur. And that's a very common statement. Or if you wouldn't be, in the presentation that we do in high schools, we actually have a girl that's violent with her boyfriend. And she says things, if you wouldn't flirt with girls all the time, I wouldn't get so mad. If you wouldn't be on your phone all the time trying to help other people, I wouldn't be so mad. It's always the other person's fault. Victim is still in shock that it happened, and it leaves them vulnerable to accept the apologies and the flowers of the abuser. False resolution based on denial and minimizing of abuse, and life goes on. The abuser will say, I'm sorry, I just lost my cool. It'll never happen again. They might encourage their girlfriend or boyfriend to go shopping, call family and friends. I'm so sorry, this isn't going to happen again. And then we start right back with that honeymoon phase where everything's perfect and wonderful. I would say as relationships go on with time, these are shorter and this one is the longest. I would say this can go on for a long time in an unhealthy relationship, that tension building phase. And sometimes victims will even try to precipitate or bring on the explosive phase because this is so stressful. Just not knowing when it's going to happen. They know it's going to happen, and sometimes they'll even kind of push it because they just want to get it over with, which seems really scary, but it does occur. So why doesn't the victim just leave? Why don't they leave, right? They're in high school. It's so easy. You're not married. Why don't they leave? Well, they don't want the relationship to end. It's easy for us to think that a batterer is all bad and the victim's all good, but there's probably a really nice side to that person. They don't want it to be over. Plus, we put a lot of pressure on kids to be with somebody. We put a lot of pressure on kids to date, right? Fear of what will happen if they leave, retaliation, fearful that if they break up with somebody, that they will share pictures, that they might share a privacy that they gave someone, or a secret that they shared. In relationships, I think that it's normal for us to be vulnerable with our partner, and we might share private things. One thing that we see a lot of is sharing pictures, inappropriate pictures. If I leave him or her, they'll share that, right? And then I'm going to get in trouble. Worried that no one will believe him or her. What if your partner's super popular? What if your partner is in a grade above you? They're older than you, and no one will believe me. Like, I was lucky to date that person. They're not going to believe that I was the victim here. Confusing to love someone who hurts you. That also is very, very relevant in child abuse. As a mentor, you are going to work with kids who might not be the victim of physical abuse, but maybe mental or emotional abuse from a parent, or maybe neglect. It's really hard when you love someone who doesn't give you what you deserve. And I think that when you are experiencing that, you oftentimes think if you're a better person, if you're a better kid, if you're a better girlfriend, if you're a better boyfriend, if you're a better son, a better daughter, then maybe you'll be deserving of that person's love. And it's really sad because that is very confusing. Parents oftentimes don't take the relationship seriously. They're afraid to tell their parents. They may, if they leave, they may not be able to talk to their partner anymore. And that might be their whole friend group. That's another thing that we see in teenage relationships a lot, that you date somebody, but then their friends become your friends. So if you break up with that person, then what if you don't have any friends, right? Sides are taken, lines are drawn, and then it just causes a big problem. We see that a lot in small schools. What if there's only 40 people in your class and you break up with that person who's not good to you, and your classmates know. They know. They think they don't know. We think we hide that well, but they know. But they don't want it either because they don't want to have to choose. They blame from self and others. They feel like it's their fault. They feel like if they were better, they could change things. And honestly, with dating violence and sexual assault, there's so much self-blame. There's a lot of shame that's involved with that. And truthfully, sometimes it's just easier to stay. I would say that that's the case in a lot of situations. Warning signs of abuse. Bruises, especially in places that can be covered by clothing. That's where I was saying be careful, watch what they're wearing. If you see that they're wearing hoodies in hot heat, if they're covering things up, if they're, we do see too, like a lot of times we'll see girls pull their hair down or try to cover their hair up, or sit there like this and trying to cover up their arms. I would say those are very common spots. It also could be a sign of self-harm. Lots of kids, particularly when we talk about sexual assault, a lot of victims of sexual assault will self-harm, and they put them in places that maybe could be seen, but maybe not. Maybe they're testing to see if you see them. When we go over sexual assault, I'm going to share a story. Taylor reminded me to share a story about a girl that I think wanted me to see, and I missed it at first, and it was hard for me. Wearing turtlenecks and long pants in warm weather, and injuries with explanations that don't match. You know, when someone has a black eye, that black eye is like the trademark of domestic violence, right? That's what's going to happen to you. That actually is not all that common. I would say scratches, bruising on the arms, on the hands from maybe fighting or grabbing somebody. The black eye, I mean, that's pretty obvious, but I don't know that that's the most common injury. Warning signs with the appearance, changing the way they dress. This is a huge red flag. They start wearing baggy, loose-fitting clothing, dress in a style that does not match their personality. So two things could be going on here. If I'm a victim and my boyfriend is mad at me and jealous and thinks that I'm flirting with everybody in school, I try to make myself invisible. I try to make myself unattractive so nobody talks to me and nobody looks at me, and then maybe he won't be mad. So I start wearing baggy clothes. I don't do my hair. I don't put makeup on. The other thing that could be happening is all of a sudden maybe they dress in a different way. Maybe my partner says to me, I don't like how you dress. You look fat in that. I want you to wear this. I want you to wear that. Why don't you look like this person? She's really pretty. If you dress like her, maybe I wouldn't have to maybe I'd love you then if you looked like her. So they change how they dress to make their partner happy. Stop wearing makeup. They don't want to be seen. They don't want anyone to talk to them, flirt with them, and changes in weight. That is extremely common. We see a lot of weight loss. We see a lot of weight gain. If you're working with a mentee and you just see some pretty significant changes, because you guys have the benefit of working with them over a long period of time. Now, some of that's just getting older. Some kids, puberty happens, but if you see extremes and change in personality, those are red flags. Attitude, avoiding eye contact, very, very common. Drop in confidence, defensiveness. You go in and you say, hey Billy, how are things going with Sarah? Why do you ask? She's fine. She's great. She's really great. Okay? Most kids want to talk about, oh, it's great. It's really good. We went to homecoming. I think she likes me. We have a lot of fun. We went to the movie. Avoiding that conversation, looking down, not wanting to talk, being nervous, defensive about it. Those are red flags. Alternating between bragging about their relationship and being quiet about it. We used to have a program, we still have the program. I used to do a program where we would go into the schools and do these 10-week groups. And I remember being concerned about a young woman in one of my groups because all she could say about her partner was that they had been together 6 months and they had never, ever had an argument. They had never had a disagreement. He loved her so much and they were perfect and they were going to get married. And I'm thinking, 6 months, there wasn't a disagreement over music or over what show to watch. Nope, we agree on everything. Well, I found out a couple months later that it was so violent that he had actually thrown her out of a car at one point. Bragging about how great things are, trying to make it perfect so that nobody knows, because her relationship was going to be perfect. Missing out on group activities because they have to go somewhere with their boyfriend or girlfriend. Another thing we're seeing a lot is kids that have to constantly check in. All of a sudden, I have to have my phone at the supper table because if I don't, instantly respond to, my streak on Snapchat, probably the world is going to explode, okay? This is the conversation we've had in my own home with my children. No one's going to die if you don't respond to your streaks right now. But if you're in an unhealthy relationship and you don't respond to your streak, you might be in trouble, okay? So if you're working, especially because you guys go into schools, right? And they're not supposed to probably have their phones. If you have a mentee that's constantly needing to check their phone, I get it. Like you come in there and you say, hey, take a minute, respond to your phone. I'm sure your friends have been texting you. That's bonding, right? They like that. But if they keep checking it and you say, well, what's going on? And they're nervous and they look nervous about not being able to respond immediately, that could be a sign that they're afraid that their boyfriend or girlfriend is mad at them. Feelings, nervousness. Boyfriend or girlfriend walks them to and from class. Very common. Wants to be in kind of control of who they're talking to. We've actually even seen victims change their schedule so that it can match that of their partner. Cautious to avoid eye contact with members of the opposite sex. We've talked about that several times. Just avoiding anything that could make that partner mad. Complaining about frequent headaches and stomach aches. Very common. I think there's so much anxiety that goes along with trying to keep everything. That tension building stage is so anxiety ridden that they oftentimes have a lot of headaches and stomach aches. Isolation. Friends say they aren't fun to be around anymore. They're spending all their time with their boyfriend or girlfriend. So if you think about how that feeds into that cycle, right? So I'm in an unhealthy relationship and my boyfriend doesn't want me to do anything with anybody else. But Taylor and I always do girls' night on Friday night. We've always done girls' night on Friday night. So all of a sudden I tell Taylor, I can't come Friday night. And Taylor's like, what? We've always done girls' night. I'm sorry. I've got to spend time with Billy because he just, his family situation's not good. Fine. Well, that might go for a couple weeks, but then all of a sudden I stop eating lunch with Taylor, okay, because my boyfriend wants me to sit with him. Then all of a sudden, not only do I not do girls' night, but I don't even text her on her birthday, right? So here's what happens. Taylor is thinking, well, Abby, you're a crappy friend. I'm mad at you. So she comes to me and says, hey, you need to break up with Billy. He's a crappy boyfriend. I'm not going to break up with him. I'm sorry. I'm not going to break up with him. I love him. So then Taylor decides she doesn't want to be my friend anymore, right? Because I'm not a good friend to her, and I'm not. So then what that does is that further isolates me, and then I'm even more in his control. So one of the things we're trying to do is talk to kids about how not to isolate your friends because they're in an unhealthy relationship. They miss class regularly. They skip. Maybe they don't go to a class if there's a person in there that your partner doesn't like. Lose interest in activities they used to like. Why would you go out for soccer? You can't be with me then. I don't want you to play soccer. Soccer's stupid. Only stupid people play soccer. Okay, so I'll quit soccer. Then maybe I can be with you more. If you loved me, you'd want to spend time with me. You know I don't work till night. If you play soccer and you have practice till 6 and then I work, we're never going to see each other. So then you quit. Friends are giving up on them. Taylor's given up on me because I'm never around for her. And then I'm truly only with my partner. That's the end of this one? Okay. So that's about dating violence. And then what I want to do is I want to go into sexual assault because I would say that we do see a lot of unhealthy relationships. Through the center, we do serve adolescents. We have a lot of programs in our office in order to do that. But what we really see a lot of is sexual assault. And it's not just happening to girls. So I think it's an area that we need to be really more knowledgeable about. And I think it's also an area where as adults, as mentors, we're really nervous. We're nervous to talk about it. So sexual assault. Again, self-care. This can be really hard to talk about. If anyone ever needs to leave, they are welcome to do so. Okay, what is sexual assault? Any sexual act done against your will, without your consent, or when you are unable to freely give consent. When would someone be unable to freely give consent? If they're intoxicated, right? Mentally incapable. We definitely see people with limited mental abilities, kids that maybe are in special ed classes, are very vulnerable, right? Because they can't always consent to those things. They're not always understanding of what's being asked of them. But intoxication is a huge part of that. When you are unable to freely give consent, sexual assault is not about sex. It's still the biggest misconception of what we do. It is about power and control over another person. So what we're going to really talk a lot about today is we're going to talk about like serial date rapists, okay? I'm the mother of boys. It is really insulting to me when people come to me and say men rape, okay? We have men in here. I bet you don't rape. Most men don't rape. Men are good and honorable. The problem is that there's a really, really, really small percentage of men that do that, and unfortunately they do it over and over and over and over again. Most of those men could probably get sex, consensual sex, but that's not what they like. They like being able to take sex. Sexual assault is not a misunderstanding. Sexual assault is somebody planning to do that to somebody because they like the power and control of taking that sex. So the facts. This is how few sexual assaults are actually go through the court system. Females aged 16 to 19 are 4 times more likely than the general population to be victims of rape, attempted rape, or sexual assault. That is the number. We would say, we have another stat that we use a lot, that ages 16 to 24 is the most common age for sexual assault. 8 out of 10 rapes are committed by someone the victim knows. So I always laugh about this because when I was a kid, my dad used to always tell me if I was going to go to Omaha, be really careful if I go to the mall, right? Because some scary person is probably going to drag me behind the bushes and rape me at the mall, all right? That is what we were taught to be afraid of. But the truth is, and that does happen, I don't mean to belittle stranger rape. That is like horrific and tends to have very high levels of violence. But what's most common, if you're sitting in a room, frankly, I would say 1 out of 3, the stat changes. I'm still comfortable saying 1 out of 3 women will be the victim of sexual assault. There's several women in here. What does that mean? That means almost any room you're in, probably every room you're ever in, there's going to be a victim, okay? And almost in every situation, the person who sexually assaulted them is someone that they knew. It is not a stranger, okay? Out of every 1,000 rapes that are reported, 995 perpetrators will walk free. So 5 will actually spend a day in jail, okay? When you look at this. 230 are reported, 46 lead to arrest, 9 get referred, 5 cases will lead to a felony conviction, and only 4.5 rapists will ever spend a day in jail, okay? We don't believe victims, and it's a very hard crime to prosecute. So, I want to talk a little bit about consent. We use this video because it's really funny. It's not fully encompassing of what consent is, but consent is very simple, and it's about permission. So I'm going to play this for you so that you guys can see what we see as consent.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex. If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine.
We'll get it to work.
Make them tea. Unconscious people don't.
Oh, because it's that's and then your mouse is over here, so you can go to X. So you just good. Thank you. You're welcome.
Struggling with consent. Just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they go, oh my God, I would love a cup of tea. Thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea. Not all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes, please, that's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, but you wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, but you wanted tea last night. But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
So, as you can see, it's lighthearted and funny, but it really breaks down what is consent. Consent is permission. Permission is not a one-time thing. Permission is not, hey, do you want to do this? Okay, that goes for the whole night. It's actually a dynamic activity that has to happen every step of the way. We talk about making sure that before anything happens sexually, you say to a person, are you all right with this? Are you okay with this? And even if a person starts and they maybe two people want to kiss, maybe somebody wants to kiss, but then that's all they want to do. That's okay. They just by kissing someone, you're not agreeing to doing everything. So when can you not consent to something, okay? So you cannot consent when you are intoxicated or drunk or high, okay? Alcohol. I say this telling you that I am the mother of boys again. I tell my sons all the time, if you are going to have sexual activity with someone, which I hope you wait, I pray every day that you wait, but if you don't, it should be with someone that you know well, that you care about, that you're dating, and that there is a conversation long in advance. If the only time you decide that you kind of want to mess around with somebody is at a party and they're drinking, not a good decision. It is your responsibility to get permission. Permission cannot be given when someone is drunk or when they are high, okay? If they are passed out, they cannot consent to sex. Even, and what I love about that T is consent videos, even if they consented before they passed out, if they're at a party and someone says, yeah, well, I want to do this, and then you go into the bathroom and you come back and your partner is passed out, it's done. It's over. If they can't contribute, they can't consent, okay? If they are mentally or physically impaired, this is where we see particularly people with who maybe might have special ed or coming in, they definitely are vulnerable. They can be taken advantage of. Now, that doesn't mean that two people that are of the same ability can't have a relationship. We're talking about, are they on the same level? Is somebody that is higher functioning taking advantage of somebody who's lower functioning? That's something we need to be concerned about. If they're coerced. Coerced means you're talking somebody into doing something that they don't want to do. Or maybe you say something like, coerced and threatened are really similar. Maybe you say something like, hey, you need to do this with me, or I am going to tell everybody that you did this. Or, hey, I knew about you screwing around with that person. If you don't do that with me, I'm going to tell everybody that you did that. That's not consent. If they are underage, okay, the state of Nebraska, I can tell you that the age of consent is 16. Now, that doesn't mean that two 15-year-olds can't consent to be together. It's way too young. I hope they don't. But the purpose of that is to help with statutory rape. So the laws in Nebraska are that if a perpetrator is over the age of 18, so they need to be 19, and the victim is under the age of 16, that's statutory rape. Okay, so they have to be of age. So that means if you're 19 and you're dating someone that's 15, which isn't good anyway, and they say to you, hey, I want to be with you, as the 19-year-old, you cannot have sex with that person. They can't consent. They're not old enough. It's really important to know that because the person that's responsible for that is the 19-year-old, the legal adult. So even if that younger person says, I want to be with you, as an adult, you cannot make that decision. They cannot consent. They're trying to keep young girls safe, truthfully, and actually it happens to young boys. We see this in schools. We've seen this with people that work in the schools. We've seen this with teachers. This also happens to young men. So statutory rape is a common thing. The good thing about statutory rape is it's a little bit easier to prosecute because consent really isn't an issue. The perpetrator might say, yeah, we had sex, but she wanted it. And she says, yeah, I had sex and I wanted it. But if she's not old enough to consent, all there has to be is proof that sex occurred because she can't consent, or the victim or the younger person can't consent. Okay. Oh, thank you. Oh, yes. And one person is in the position of authority. We're talking about your boss, right? If someone is wanting to have a relationship with their boss, that can be a problem because one person has power. Their power is not equal. That's why in schools, you might have a teacher that's young and that graduated early who's teaching in a high school and is 21 years old. And you might have a senior that's 19 years old. That in life is not that's not a bad, 1921 is probably fairly common. The difficulty there is a teacher cannot have a relationship with a student in any situation, regardless of age. So if one person is in a position of authority, a person cannot consent to that. So who is a rapist? Oh my goodness, this is the rapist van, right? The raper van that we see with the free candy. We typically see stereotypical rapists as male, strong, intimidating. They hide in the mall. They hide in the dark alleys, or they hide at the mall. They drive a creeper van. But remember that 8 out of 10 rapes are committed by someone the victim knows, and actually by someone that the victim trusts. Very rarely does it actually somebody in a creeper van. although that's what we're kind of told. So why don't victims report? What do we hear? When victims do report, we say things like, well, what was she wearing, right? Don't you think you're being a little dramatic? Come on, was it really happen that way? Were you drinking? Okay, how much were you drinking? Why were you drinking? Oh, you guys, as a parent of high schoolers, I could so see myself saying that. If my child came to me and said, you know, Mom, I was sexually assaulted, I was raped, I'd be like, oh, you were at a party? Why were you at a party? What were you drinking? So the thing that's most natural for us to say as parents is like the worst possible thing we could say to a victim. You all knew he was like that. Everybody knew he was a player, right? I saw you flirting with him. You guys were at that party. You were flirting with him. You must have done something to make him want it. You must have made him think that you wanted it. No means yes. We hear that all the time. You should feel lucky. He's so hot. He's so good looking. He's older than you. Well, did you say no? Did you say no? Hey, he's been my best friend since first grade. He would never do that. I know this person. Oh my gosh, she is such a slut. Everybody knows she's a slut. Did you see she had those jeans on? Those were slutty jeans. She's probably lying because victims lie, right? Victims lie. We hear that all the time. 3 out of 4 sexual assaults go unreported because fear of social ramifications. In a high school, if you report a sexual assault, people get in trouble, right? And there's a line, just like if you were in a dating relationship that's unhealthy, there's a line drawn and people take sides. And the social ramifications of that are very harsh. Most often, the social ramifications for sexual assault fall on the victim, which is almost always a girl. Now, young men are sexually assaulted, but typically young men are sexually assaulted when they're young boys. Okay, so it's not as common for adolescent males to be sexually assaulted. That does not mean it does not happen. That does not mean that we would not take that seriously. We do see those victims. But if we're talking about what's common, sexual assault of I would say, even like 13, 14-year-olds and then up to high school age is probably more common. And they're the ones that often always carry that social stigma. Embarrassment. They're embarrassed. They're embarrassed that it happened. They feel stupid. They blame themselves. They get blamed from others. They're worried about not being believed. I would say that's probably the number one thing that I think we hear from victims. Who's going to believe me? I'm younger. He was popular. He's good looking. He can get sex, right? Because people think it's about sex. He can get sex. Like, he wouldn't have to rape me. They feel that no one will believe them. And they also don't want to get the perpetrator in trouble, right? They just didn't want him to do that, but they don't want him to go to jail. They don't want him to get in trouble. They don't want to cause trouble. And what we see actually really commonly in adolescents is that they don't even know they've been raped. Part of what we do with our dramatization that we do is we go in and we have a drama of this is what dating violence looks like. This is what sexual assault looks like. Because victims most of the time don't even know that that's what happened. They think, oh, that's that terrible thing I did that night. I went to that party and I got in the car with him and I thought we were just going to kiss. I had no idea who was going to do that. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. So they don't even identify that they are the victim of rape. So they say it was their fault, but we say blaming the victim does not excuse violence. Violence in all its forms is the fault of the perpetrator. I want to switch to the next one. I wanted to share a little bit about, let's go on here. Okay, but what if they're lying about being raped? So we hear that a lot. Women lie, victims lie. Sexual assault does not happen. Only about 2 to 10% of reported rapes are false accusations. This statistic does not exceed the rate of any other crime. So I want to address just really quickly, I think that people are afraid of the Me Too movement. Let's just put it out there. I think that, my whole life's work has been that I wanted women to be believed when they're sexually assaulted. But on the other hand, I do feel like what has happened, probably maybe a small negative problem that has come with the Me Too movement is that my male friends feel frightened. They're worried. What if someone were to accuse me of that? What if someone were to say that I did that? What if someone lied about that? And I do think that that would be really detrimental. I think that would be scary, and I don't want to minimize that. I think that that would be frightening to have that accusation against you. Please know that I am a firm believer in believing victims, but I'm also a firm believer in due process. Everybody deserves to have a defense and to be able to defend themselves. But as I tell my sons and my husband, this is where character comes into play. If you've exhibited good character and you're a man of honor, if someone were to make a false accusation against you, it would be much harder to be believed. And hopefully with that due process, it would be proved that there's no such truth to that. Most men are men of honor and men of character, and it would not be a believable thing. And so this is accurate. I mean, it's 2 to 10%, which is the same as other crimes. And the other part that I want to talk about is, as scary as that would be if someone were falsely accused, doesn't the fact that only 5 out of 1,000 rapes that are ever committed, only 5 perpetrators will ever go to jail? So if you're looking at the thing we should really spend our energy worrying about, while that would be devastating if a false accusation was made, as I'm sure we all have sisters, cousins, daughters that we care about, the fact that so many rapists go unpunished is probably the bigger issue. So effects of sexual assault. Post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, stress, fear, 6 times more likely after a sexual assault. Flashbacks. Flashbacks are different than nightmares. Flashbacks are actually super common with sexual assault. A flashback is where I am totally conscious, I'm walking through the hall, okay? And somebody walks by me that might have worn the same cologne. Flashback. I actually feel like I am physically in that moment again. Oftentimes their heart rate races, they'll get sweaty, they'll kind of have an anxiety attack. That's a flashback. Depression, 3 times more likely after sexual assault. Alcohol abuse, 13 times more likely after sexual abuse. Drug abuse, 26 times more likely after sexual abuse. Self-harm, suicide, 4 times more likely to contemplate suicide. I don't know. I think that's low.
Yeah.
I think that's low. We
I don't know
see,
how accurate this slide is.
yes. I mean, I wonder, yes. So we see victims, sometimes we see victims right after it happens. Sometimes it's a long time past before they come forward. But I would say most of the victims that we work with have either self-harmed in some manner or had suicidal thoughts at some point. I would say that that's a much higher statistic. Very common. Sleep disorders, sleep anxiety, eating disorders, very common. Because what do? We control what we can. I can't control how I'm feeling, but if I stop eating or if I eat a lot, I can control that. And pregnancy. Sometimes intended pregnancy. Like I'm so upset, I've been so damaged, I'm going to just do something and I choose. I'm going to have sex on my choice and I'm going to have a baby because I can control that.
Do you want to talk about the story that you wanted before we're going to pull her Baker?
What story was I going to share?
About self-harm, maybe?
Oh, yes, self-harm. Okay, as mentors, there's a few things that I would like you to watch for. After sexual assault, oftentimes victims you'll see change in clothing. You'll see a change in how they sit. They'll hunch. They don't want anyone to look at them. They'll stop wearing makeup. But self-harm part of that is that sometimes they will self-harm in ways that they want you to see. Some self-harm happens like in the thighs or in the thighs. But sometimes, I think if they've done it a while and nobody's caught them, sometimes they want to be caught. They're just not sure how to tell anybody. So I had a situation where I was doing groups at a school, and there was a girl that always wore all these plastic bracelets, those stretchy ones. Sometimes they have like sad things, kids that have struggled with maybe cancer or whatever, these plastic bracelets, and she always had them on. And I noticed that she had a change in demeanor, and she was quieter and maybe even angry sometimes when we would have discussions. And she would always have these bracelets on, and she would snap these bracelets. And one day she kept like talking to me, and she was waving her arms around, and I thought, why is she so crazy? Like, is she hyper today or what? So that day she left group, And I had gone back to work, and I got a call from a different student that was in that group. And I'm use a made-up name. And she said, Abby, did you see Mary's wrists? Mary's not her name. And I said, well, I noticed she was really nervous today. And she goes, you need to come over here. You need to come over here now. She has something in her wrist. So I went over to the school, and she had actually taken a safety pin, a large safety pin, put it through her wrist, pulled it out, and closed it. The part that was so hard for me is she was wanting me to see it. She didn't have her bracelets on. She kept taking her bracelets off. She was talking to me like this. She clearly wanted me to see it. That was a cry for help. Help me, help me, help me. I don't understand what I'm doing. I don't want to hurt myself anymore. Help me. I was so thankful to the student that called me and said, can you please check on her? She's got something in her wrist. And you know what? We were able to get the school involved. We were able to bring the parents in, and they were able to get her help. But it turned out that about 3 months earlier, she had been the victim of sexual assault, and she just didn't know what to do with that pain. So as a mentor, be looking for those things. Be looking at their wrists. Be looking at, sometimes on the top, they'll just scratch. Sometimes it's on the top of their thighs if they're wearing shorts. Sometimes they want you to notice. And it's okay to ask about it. You can say, hey, that looks like it hurts. What happened? What, did you do that? And if you're really concerned, I think it's okay to say, did you do that to yourself? You know, sometimes, and it's also really important to say to them, sometimes when we're hurting, we do things we don't understand to ourselves. That doesn't make you crazy. You can tell me. And so that you reassure them that you're safe to tell. But don't be afraid to ask the questions. Remember, you don't have to fix this problem. I think sometimes people who are mentors or coaches or teachers are afraid that, oh, if I open up that can of worms, then I have to fix that problem. That's not your job. Your only job is to be a constant presence in that child's life. And if they are trying to get you to see that, they want you to notice because they trust you.
I also think that people don't want to bring it up because they think it'll make it worse or that they'll want to do it more. But I think that it actually might have adverse effects and they would know, like someone noticed it. So think about that too. Because I've caught myself when I'm working with kids, I look at that now. And there have been times when I'm like, maybe I don't want to bring that up at all. I don't want to open up that can of worms, but it's actually a good conversation to have.
And self-harm is one of the most treatable things that is out there. And oftentimes it literally just takes a good therapist because they don't know what to do. They don't know how to talk about it. Sometimes they don't even know what they're upset about. Sometimes it's a very obvious event that occurred. But just talking about it is that release of that pressure.
And I do think that a few times when I've talked about it with kids, they're more likely to bring it up with me later. And sometimes it's a little victory for them to tell me, I haven't self-harmed in a month. So that's something that they want to tell me because I've noticed the marks. And now they want to tell me, like, it's been a year now. Like,
They're
I'm
proud.
excited about that. And then I've actually also had kids that say, it was 6 months, but I messed up. But I've been back on, I haven't done it in a week. So we celebrate those little victories too.
Kids don't want to hurt themselves. They just don't know what to do with that pain.
Yeah.
So, how can you help? Okay, I am going to teach you one of the most effective tools I have ever found in my career. So, I have worked in this field for about 27 years. I've been at the center for 19 years. This is, I've looked this up. It's called Baser Guide. I've tried to find history on it, and to be honest with you, I don't know where it came from. I just know it works. So, as we respond to the kids that we work with, what's important isn't having all the answers. I like to say we're going to arm you with some tools for your tool belt. So that if one of your mentees is having an issue or they're struggling with something and you're not quite sure what it is, or they say something to you and you have this panic, what do I say to that? What do I say to that, right? Because we have that with teens. Baser is a really easy guide that I have taught. So I've done Revolution, which is a teen mentor group for 11 years. Every kid that's ever had that group knows this. They can say it forwards, backwards. I'll run into them in the street, and they're in their 30s, and they'll be like, Baser, believe, affirm, support, empower, refer, refer, refer. It's a very easy tool, and it's a tool to use in many situations. So it's an acronym for believe, affirm, support, empower, refer, okay? So I'm going to go over a little bit about what each one of them mean. So BASER is meant to be a response to sexual assault. Someone comes to you and says, hey, I've been sexually assaulted. And it's how to respond to sexual assault. But it works in so many areas. It works in so many areas. Anything that can happen to someone that there might be shame involved, okay? The very first I always joke that I want you to remember all 5. But if you can only remember 2, if you're like me and you remember things for about 13 seconds, I want you to do the B and the R, okay? Believe. Believe. So, what does believe mean? Does believe mean that every single word that they're saying is true? No. You're not the cops. I'm not the cops. Taylor and I have said for the dawn of time, when someone comes to us with sexual assault, oftentimes we don't get the whole story. We might get a complete false story, but they're testing us to see if we're trustworthy before they tell us the real story, okay? So when I say believe, if they come to you and say, listen, something happened to me, and it's completely implausible. I will give you an example. One time I had a young woman, this was years ago, come to me and say, she had issues, okay? She had a home that was I think she'd been in and out of foster care many, many times. She was, I don't know, we would have called her a high maintenance kid, okay? She came to me and she said, yeah, that park over by the high school, I was in the bathroom one time and a guy came in with a gun and he had a mask and he raped me by gunpoint at the bathroom. And yeah, he did that to me, okay? Now, here's what I'm telling you. Do I think that happened in the way in which she's telling me? I don't. But I do believe that something serious has happened to her. She was testing me to see how I responded, to see if I was a trustworthy person. And another thing that we've learned about trauma, one of the most incredible trainings I ever learned about trauma is what I call the Post-it note theory. I'm visual, you can set that paper in front of me and I don't even care. You show me a picture, I'm in. So this Post-it note theory is, I want you guys to think about the worst event that ever happened in your life. Maybe even think of it as a car accident, okay? Or something happened with one of your children, or just the worst thing that ever happened. And you wrote the entire story out on a series of Post-it notes. I'm going to give you 200 Post-it notes, and you're going to just write out the story on Post-it notes. Your brain, in order to help you deal with something, particularly children, hides all those Post-it notes in different closets and compartments of the brain, okay? And it does that to protect you because you can't handle it all. So as we remember those things, we remember them out of order. We remember small segments. And so it seems not believable, but really it's like number 3 out of 199 Post-it notes. So it doesn't seem accurate, but it is. It's just one small part of that picture. So when I tell you believe, I'm not saying that what they're saying is exactly accurate. I'm saying believe that something has happened to them. So believing. What are believing statements? I believe you. It's so simple. We've tried to think of 50 million cool ways to say I believe you, but the truth is just say I believe you, okay? That's all you got to know. I believe you. 3 words. Don't have to change it up. Affirm. Affirming and supporting. Affirming and supporting is just telling them that you're proud of them. That had to be really hard to tell me. I am so proud that you've had the guts to do that. That's scary. I'm gonna be here and I'm gonna help you figure this out, okay? Believing, affirming, supporting, empower. And you know what? I'm gonna be here to help you figure out what we're gonna do, and we're gonna be able to get you some help, okay? Refer. Refer, 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 refer. Remember how I told you your job is not to fix it? There are people that are trained to fix it. There are people that are trained to help. So the way I get the kids to remember this acronym is they have to say, believe, affirm, support, empower, refer, refer, refer. Believe, affirm, support, empower, refer, refer, refer. So if you think about this, this is not a 2-hour conversation. Okay? Talk less, listen more. If your mentee says to you, I don't know, I kind of want to talk to you. I think something might have happened to me. You can talk to me. You can tell me anything. I think I think that my uncle might have done something to me when I was a kid. What do you think he did? Well, I know he touched me, and it was really scary, like sexually. And you just look at him and say, I believe you. That had to be really, really hard to say that. And I want you to know, you're not alone. We are going to figure this out, and we are going to get you help. And you know what? I'm going to get you the help you need. I don't have all the answers, but we're going to figure it out. I've believed, I've affirmed, I've supported, I've empowered, and now I need to refer, right? So, we're mandatory child abuse reporters, and we're not here to fix those problems. So if our mentee tells us something like that, which is really common, you guys, I guarantee you, if all of you have had mentors, you've had kids who've had sexual abuse. You need to call the people that can help you, and I'll give you that information. Do you guys have questions on that, Phaser? It's the best tool ever. I use it all the time. Okay. Resources. So the very first thing is, especially with sexual abuse and dating violence, is to contact your local domestic violence sexual assault agency. Here in Columbus, we at the Center for Survivors, we serve 6 counties. If you don't know who to call us. We'll find you the agency. In all states, we have a national coalition that filters into state coalitions that filters into local domestic violence sexual assault agencies. So what that means is we all abide by the same rules. We all have the same rules of confidentiality. We're all free and confidential. And even if you're not in our service area and you have a question, we will answer that question for you. We will give you the information of who to call in your area, who would be the person and the agency to contact. Domestic violence sexual assault agencies are just really good because they often have a real feel for the local resources in that area too. So if you're in a different town and you're a different state, they can be your person that you contact. Now, as far as being a teammate's mentor, the very first person that you should talk to about if you hear something with your mentor is potentially the guidance counselor or the director of your program. I should have put that on there. I had Taylor do that. You really have to inform them. They really need to know what's going on with their mentees, and they oftentimes will already have those resources for you and know where you can go for that. You have to think of yourself, I always joke, even in a domestic violence agency, we're kind of like the ER. We're like the trauma center, right? You are the first line of defense for your mentee. Your job is to be there for them. So if they share it to you, you don't have to fix that, but let's get it to the people that can get the answers that we need, okay? National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. I put these up here because these are places that if you're not sure, maybe you're not sure what they just told you. Maybe you're not sure if they're suicidal. Maybe you don't know. You can call and you can give examples like, hey, this is what I do. I'm a mentor. I've got this kid. I heard this thing. What do you think of that? And they can just talk you through it. The Nebraska Coalition website. This is our coalition for domestic violence and sexual assault. The National Domestic Violence Hotline. That's a national line that you can call. And this doesn't mean necessarily that you're the victim, but if you have questions, oftentimes supportive others, secondary people, call and get information. National Teen Dating Abuse Helpline. It's also something if you're not sure. Let's say that you're not sure, but you think that your mentee is not in a good relationship. You can give them that and say, you know what? I don't know. I'm old. I like to use that excuse. I always tell my kids, I'm old. What do I know? I'm out of that. I've been married a long time, but it just seems like you're not very happy. Maybe you don't want to tell me because I'm old, but if you call that number, they don't know who you are. You can call them anonymously, and they don't even know who you are. And of course, kids don't call anymore, so they can call to get the website, and then they can text it in. I don't know if they take Snapchat because that's all that kids seem to do anymore. The National Sexual Assault Hotline is the same way. Girls and Boys Town National Crisis Hotline, that is a great resource. They have access to anything that has to do with something that could happen to kids. It's a really great resources. The other agency, I am a huge United Way fan. United Way funds us a lot. When we have programs that maybe the government doesn't want to fund, our United Way helps us. But United Ways in almost every community have a book of local resources, and I always think, I'm going to go back to that tool belt analogy. I always think it's great to have as many tools in your tool belt to help your mentees as you can. So those are important resources. So this is our local contact information. We're the Center for Survivors. And while we are only just we serve dating violence, sexual assault, we also do some information with trafficking. Trafficking is a really concerning trend that we are seeing. I think particularly with vulnerable young adults, it's a really scary thing. There's a lot of information out there about trafficking, and that's something that we're working on. So you're welcome to call us. You can always call us if you have questions or if you just need some guidance. We'd be glad to help. So I think I'm doing good. Yes, we were attacked, I think, by a foreign country, and our website has been down. When you have a domestic violence sexual assault website, for some reason you're like, hackers love you, and it crashes our system all the time. So instead of getting crashed again, we're working on getting a whole new site. But you can always contact us by phone.
Yeah,
So.
and if you ever need to look us up online, you can go to our Facebook page or
Yes.
probably Facebook's more like user friendly. Instagram, you can use that.
Yes.
too, but-
Well, let's be honest, because most mentors are not. We're probably more Facebook friendly than Instagram. Instagram's hard, but like my kids say, only old people use Facebook, so that's probably a better place for us to get information. Yeah. So the Center for Survivors has a Facebook page. Yeah, and then there's a survey that they would like you to fill out for the training, and if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Oh, you bet. Thank you. All right.